Kansas has a Baylor problem. Yeah, they've also got a Texas Tech problem. But they have plenty more problems under the surface from what we saw on Saturday. The biggest choke in Kansas basketball history, the biggest blown lead they've ever had. Kansas has been playing basketball for a long time. I think you guys might know that. A long time, 120 some odd years. And the worst loss in terms of a blown lead they've ever had was Saturday against the lowly Baylor Bears. This Baylor Bears team that so desperately needed a win, and yet Kansas was rolling. Up 21 in the first half, up 19 at halftime. Hunter Dickinson having himself a day. Everything going right for Bill Self's Jayhawks. Until they had to play a second half. Dang, isn't that a bummer, Bill, that you got to go out there and play a second half? And then it's all Baylor. 60 points in the second half. They make up that 19-point deficit and then some. They win by 11. The quick math here, folks. Big 12 math. That's a 30-point swing from the first half to the second half. That does not happen often. It shouldn't happen with a Baylor team that struggled offensively and lost their best player midway through the second half. And it should never happen to the Kansas Jayhawks. So what happened, Hall of Famer Bill Self? What happened from the first half to the second that led to such disastrous results for your team?
I honestly believe the oranges that we ate at halftime that Baylor provided was probably the reason why we sucked the second half. So,
likely story. It could well be. Who knows what Baylor did to those oranges at halftime in Kansas's locker room? I mean, look, I got to say this. I know this is sacrilegious as a fan of another team in the Big 12. I kind of like Bill Self. He's very folksy, and he's never going to lean into, like, he doesn't want to give you the grabby quote, really. Like, he'll give you something like that where it's obviously tongue-in-cheek. But that's a double-edged sword, It certainly feels good after a win when he's got some folksy, funny comments. But then after a loss, he'll give you some of that. And I'm sure KU fans hated to hear that. And then every once in a while, he'll give you the infamous quote like he gave last year about giving up on his team 3 weeks before the end of the season. So it's a double-edged sword with having the Hall of Famer Bill Self. But here's the problem. Before we get into kind of the numbers of this thing, Kansas, they're just not your slightly older brother's Kansas. We said this last year, and honestly, this year's team looks like a carbon copy. Better roster, better health, and yet they still look the same. Man, they struggle to win big games on the road. Hunter Dickinson goes missing for more than half the game, and they can't beat these teams that are supposed to be the plucky upstarts, teams that Kansas is supposed to roll over. And you look at the last couple years from, I would say, kind of the faltering of the Kansas program. And obviously that's very relative. Like, they're still very good. And they did win a national championship in 2022 after Baylor won one in 2021. But I would look at really the last 3 or 4 years, which, yeah, does include a national championship season. And they're having trouble with these games they just used to walk over, right? 14 straight conference championships. Regular season conference championship, which is more impressive than winning the conference tournament. And since then, since they lost out on that, I'll be a nice guy and say 14 in a row. Of course, 2018 is vacated, but I'll be a nice guy and include that. Since then, only 1.5. And since then, they've also struggled against some of those upstart programs that have made the Big 12 into a deeper, better conference. Those two being Baylor and Texas Tech. Kansas has not beaten Baylor in Waco in 5 years, since pre-COVID. Like, we were about to find out what COVID was a few weeks later. It was a full house, college game day. Azubuike had a tremendous game, and since then they have not won in Waco since. Now, for Baylor fans of my vintage, of my ilk, okay, that was something so beyond our wildest dreams 6 years ago, or 5 years ago, or 3 years ago, that you're going to beat them at home 5 years in a row. That's 5 straight years where you beat Kansas. I don't care where it is. And in fact, it's 6 straight because they beat them on the road in 2020. 6 straight years beating Kansas. That was not an option when I was in college 10 years ago. Not that long ago. I started college 10 years ago. That wasn't an option to beat Kansas. They did it once in my 4 years at Baylor, and that was the first time they had beaten them in 5 years. So the class before me did not see that happen, or 2 years before me did not see that happen. And Texas Tech, same thing. Texas Tech has made Kansas stub their toe quite a bit over the last couple of years. In fact, while they haven't had the run that Baylor's had against Kansas, in Tech's last 4 losses to the Jayhawks, the margin has been under 5 points, 4.75. In Tech's last 4 wins against Kansas, the margin is 19.5 points. So when they beat Kansas, they beat the hell out of Kansas. That includes a 29-point victory against the Jayhawks after KU beat Baylor by 3 as a game-tying 3 rimmed out at the buzzer at Allen Fieldhouse last year. So these games that used to just be foregone conclusions for Bill Self and the Jayhawks are no longer that way. The rest of the conference has more or less caught up to Kansas. And that's not even mentioning Houston, who's the new team to the conference, has beaten them 2 years in a row and destroyed them at the Fertitta Center last year, and then won in Allen this year and won the Big 12 last year, and is probably going to do the same thing this year, them and Iowa State, right? Iowa State, they walked Kansas a couple weeks ago. They beat them last year too. Like this is just not throw on the uniform with the 6 letters in red, white, and blue across your chest and go out there and win the Big 12. That's the deeper problem for Kansas here. But the problem in terms of the day is they gave up 60 points in the second half. 60. And VJ Edgecombe was out for half of them. Half of that half, he was gone. And the other big problem is the intestinal fortitude, the balls of this team. Okay, because they go into the half with a 19-point lead. I don't care where you're playing. I don't care if you're a road team at Allen Fieldhouse. If you're up 19 at the half, you should win that game. They not only blew that lead, but then they went back up 10 in the second half. People forget that. Baylor took a lead at whatever, 49, 47 or whatever it was. And then Kansas went up 59-49. Like it was like after VJ goes down, you're like, okay, this is over now. This was nice, but I don't have to do a post game. Like it's over now. And then Baylor comes back again. That's a big time issue that Bill Self can laugh off with the Oranges in the post game, but certainly can't going forward. And I think they've got Iowa State next. I think they've got Iowa State at Allen on tonight. Quick turnaround. Obviously, Baylor has a big-time game against Tech on the road on Tuesday. Oof, that's going to be tough. But there are so many issues with this Kansas team. And look, it's credit to Baylor as well. Credit to Rob Wright for having a huge second half, 20 points in the second half, filling in for VJ in terms of the scoring. Norchad Omier had, I think, 1 point in the first half? Am I right on that? Yeah, 1 point, 0 of 4 from the floor in the first half. In the second half, even with foul trouble, he goes right at your man, Hunter Dickinson, for 17 and 11 to go 18 and 16 on the game. And now people might start listening to me when it comes to Hunter Dickinson, who is the most overrated player in the country, because he's first half Hunter. That's what he is. First half Hunter, first 20 Dickinson. Like that's what he is. And he'll give you a good 10 or 12 minutes every game, a very high level 10 or 12 minutes every game. But A, it's not usually the last 10 or 12 minutes. And B, it doesn't go more than 10 or 12 minutes because he did it again. Now, the scoring was a little bit more even, but 12 points in the first half, 8 in the second half. But you guys watching the game, Hunter was really giving them fits the first 10, 12 minutes of the game. And then after that, he was a non-factor. And his major numbers have gone down, including rebounding in this year. 7'2" guy, and his rebounding numbers are going down. Overrated. Nice player. Good player. Not National Player of the Year stuff. Not first team All-American stuff. He's just not. And Norchad's coming off a terrible stretch, and he just takes it to Dickinson in the second half. Baylor is having a nice weekend here. Kansas has some real problems. And until Kansas can start rolling over teams like Baylor and Tech and even a Houston, because, Houston's better than those two teams, but in terms of name brand, until Kansas can start rolling over those teams again, then their fans are not going to see them as real Kansas until then. And you're going to see more of this 3 seed, 4 seed, hoping to get out of the, first weekend, Sweet 16s, an accomplishment. That used to not be the case for Kansas, but the way they're going right now, that certainly is. And you have to credit, Houston coming into this conference and thriving, Baylor absolutely stepping up their game the last 5-6 years, and Tech doing the same and becoming national kind of powers here for this stretch of time. Kansas has a lot of issues. Let me know what you think they are down in the comments below. Or am I overdoing this? Are they not overrated? Is Hunter Dickinson actually really good? Or are you agreeing with me? Let me know in the comments below, or tweet at us at Locked On Baylor, and catch us on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for making it to the end of the video, and thank you for making the Locked On Podcast Network part of your daily routine. We have got you covered with the most Baylor Bears athletics coverage of any outlet that's not directly tied into Baylor University. So if you want more of that, be sure to like and subscribe. Ring that notification bell to get notified every time we're dropping a video here on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks, and sick 'em.